الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we are on page 27 now, 27 on our booklets. We are now in the section on the spiritual psychology of sin, and we are within that section on part 2, where we're going through the various madakhil, the various ways in which people enter into sin. And we spoke about last week the glance. That was the primary and the first way or entry point that sin becomes something beautified for the human being through their visual input. And we spoke about the importance of controlling the gaze. And we spoke about how significant even a simple glance might be. Now we move on to the second thing. And this second thing is built on the first. The first was the glance, and this will often lead to then a thought. The glance leads to a thought. And so these are the khatirat, the passing thoughts that come into our minds. And we went over a little bit about it last week, and we spoke about how important it is for a person to be able to guide their thoughts towards positive ideas. And the idea of a person can master the thought just when it becomes a thought, before it turns into a fantasy and before it turns into a determined will, and then eventually an action, that a person would be able to actually safeguard themselves from the consequences of that one singular thought. And at the end of the day, every single evil action that you've seen or witnessed in the world, either from yourself, from other people around you, or another place in the world, and I'm talking about the genocide that's happening now, the war crimes, the oppressive regimes, the tyrants, the jabbareen of the world, all of those actions actually started with a khatar. All of those actions started with a thought. And then things moved from there. All of those people were babies, born upon the fitrah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What turned those people into Netanyahu, into the Zionists, into the CCP, into all these different oppressive regimes across the world? What turned that person into that evil being? There were thoughts. If you want to bring it back down, it was simply thoughts. Obviously, they were in environments that led to certain thoughts, but those were their thoughts that then led them down to whatever path that they wanted to go through. Now, thoughts are something that are very interesting, because no one can observe another person's thought. We can tell if a person's thinking. We can, attach different monitors and scans and do different functional imaging to be able to see blood flow into different brain regions, to be able to then recognize this person's thinking about something, but you'd never be able to actually observe the content of the thought. A person's thoughts are actually the greatest proof, you can say, against naturalism or atheism, because a person is most certain about that little guy or that little girl in their head. And that thing that thinks, that experiences, that conscious experience, that's something no one can deny. You can deny anything else, but you can't deny this. That's why Descartes said, famously, "I think, therefore I am." He was able to prove his existence by his thoughts, because that's the most real thing that he experiences. Now, thoughts are very significant, as I mentioned, and you find that many of the world religions and the previous traditions, which seem to be the case, wallahu ta'ala alam, used to be once upon a time, perhaps I shouldn't say seems to be the case, perhaps was a revealed religion from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Buddhists and the Hindus, for example. You see a very interesting approach from the Eastern traditions when it comes to thoughts. And you find that the West actually adopts a lot of these ideas, and they've incorporated it into things like psychotherapy or mental health awareness campaigns, therapy, whatever it may be. What is this approach that's coming from these ancient Eastern traditions? It's the approach of disassociating from the thoughts. Realizing that you are not that thought. And they talk about analogies like, imagine these thoughts, and there's obviously referring to negative thoughts, like thoughts, or even positive thoughts actually. Like, this is what the mindfulness practice is about, that you imagine these thoughts on like a conveyor belt. They use these different analogies and metaphors. Like a conveyor belt. And you just watch the thought go by. And you don't judge the thought. You don't let the thought take you anywhere. You just observe it as it passes your consciousness. The other example they give is like a leaf that falls from the tree. You just let yourself observe the thought that just comes into your consciousness like a leaf that falls, and eventually it will hit the ground and eventually it will exit. This is what's called mindfulness, where a person, they describe, is able to center themselves and able to disassociate from the negative thoughts and not engage with them. And so they're able to have a sense of calmness. Does it work? Of course it works. That's why people use it. It certainly works in relaxing a person and able to, in a way to be able to disassociate with certain negative thought patterns. But the question is that all what the thoughts are there for? Is that actually leading to the purpose of a person's life? Is that actually leading to a proper building of the spirit? That's a different question. I mean, you can have all the different techniques to calm yourself down. Deep breathing, exercises, even exercise, going for a run, whatever it may be. That doesn't mean that that is the spiritual path towards fulfilling your purpose in life. The Islamic worldview is very interested in thoughts, because we see thoughts as your way of interacting with the divine, your way of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only way is inside here, inside your brain. The famous narration of the Prophet ﷺ, I am, this is a hadith Qudsi, meaning that it's a narration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the Prophet ﷺ, but it's not Quran. It's not Quran, but it's still speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's not Quran. And of course the speech of Allah is not limited to the Quran. That's why you have the original Torah, you have the Injil, you have what the Prophet ﷺ heard from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Mi'raj. So the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only Quran. Allah chose the best of His speech for the Quran. So we get to see other aspects of the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the narrations and the reports that come to us from these narrations. So this is also speech of Allah, but it's not Quran. And so this speech of Allah is not necessarily preserved in exact wording, because obviously it's coming from hadith, it's not Quran. And the point is the meaning behind it. So what is this narration, this hadith Qudsi? أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِي بِهِ. I am as my servant thinks I am. The dhann of my servant. SubhanAllah, how powerful is the human capacity for thinking, that the way you think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually be a part of the causal pathway, you can say, in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to deal with you. Now obviously, nothing external from Allah causes anything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are asbab and there are means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use and choose to be able to fulfill whatever He wants to fulfill. And so a person will think good about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will act in that way towards them. A person will think bad and pessimistic about their relationship with Allah, about their sins, about their status with Allah, and that will then, in turn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will react, or sorry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will act in that way towards the person. And so people talk about perception as reality, or the way you think about something will then dictate the reality. This is actually something from within our tradition, based on this narration. That your perception is actually very important. The way you think about things and events in life is crucial, because it actually then determines or it's actually then going to give you a sign and a clue as to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to deal with you, how your reality is going to be. SubhanAllah, there's so many different narrations about this that show that the way a person thinks is going to then determine, people talk about, and there's all these different foreign ideologies. People talk about this pseudoscience, this whole universal law of attraction. You're going to attract good energy, or like attracts like, and so if you have send positive thoughts, then the universe sends you this and that or the other. For us, as I said, we have a superior concept because it's actually rooted in a very rational, coherent worldview, and that's the idea that we believe that the way we think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way we think about our circumstances, does ultimately play a role in what we then see to be of our life. So thoughts are something that are so important. They are so crucial. What we choose to populate our minds with. We talked about from a qadr point of view, from a theological point of view, and then obviously from a psychological point of view. One of the main ways of therapy is cognitive therapy for depression or anxiety. In particular for anxiety, it's very useful because that's usually associated with disordered thought patterns. And cognitive therapy, the goal of cognitive therapy is to shift the way a person thinks about themselves and the different things that happen in their life. That they don't have to think about they shouldn't think that something's going to lead to the worst consequence all the time. Catastrophization, where the smallest thing will happen and they'll be afraid of whatever it may be. They see a freckle on their skin, and all of a sudden they think, oh my goodness, is this cancer? If it's cancer, how much time do I have to live, and I'm going to die tomorrow? This is the type of anxiety that comes, and it's all thinking. People can be overthinkers as well. Paralysis by analysis, where they overthink a decision that they made or an action that they're trying to do, and they think about all the different factors and then they overthink. So much about issues that we might have from a psychological point of view can actually then be reduced to the way that we think. The way that we think. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us into what we should put in our brains, because what we put into our brains, these thoughts, will eventually become thought patterns. So the khawatir will eventually become something more substantial. They'll eventually become thought patterns. And then these thought patterns will then eventually lead to, or arise from them, it will eventually lead to ambitions, desires, intentions, actions. And so it all starts with that thought. It all starts with that thought. So, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he talks about how, and this is on page 26, we talked about it last week, the 4 fundamental thought domains. So what he says is that if you can control your thinking to focus just on these 4 things, so that any thought that you have that's not within these 4 categories, you dismiss it. And you actively try and fill your mind. And here's another thing, by the way. Trying not to think about something is not possible. They say, don't think about a pink elephant. How many people thought about the pink elephant? It just comes into your brain naturally. Now, just don't think about the pink elephant. Do not think about the pink elephant. Do your best. This pink elephant's just coming. It's 3, 4, 5 dozen just all over your brain, right? Trying not to think about something is not possible. But what is possible is choosing to populate your mind with other thoughts so that it basically dilutes whatever it is that is problematic in your brain. You choose to occupy your mind with thoughts that don't leave room for those other things that you don't want to think about, or that you think are negative, or that are causing issues. And so he mentions these 4 points: achieving worldly benefits, repelling worldly harms, achieving benefits for one's afterlife, and repelling harms in the afterlife. Productive mind is a mind whose thoughts are busied with one of these 4 domains. Now, of these different thoughts, Ibn al-Qayyim takes it a step further, and he says, you need to prioritize. What are you going to think about? Out of the positive thoughts. So we're away from the negative thoughts, and now we're on the positive thoughts. Within the positive thoughts, the question is, how do you prioritize? What are the more important thoughts for me to be thinking about? And so he gives 2 different factors you can say. the importance of the object of thought, how important is it? And number two, what is the likelihood of you losing it? Whatever the thing, that thought is in your head of what you need, that's number one. And number two is the likelihood of losing it. So number one, the importance of something. How do you judge how important something is? It's in relation to your purpose in life. That's how you judge how important something is. How connected is it to your purpose in life? And how facilitating is it for your purpose? How much is that thing that you're thinking about going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The more and more something will bring you closer to Allah, or repel evil, not take you further away from Allah. So a sin that you might want to be avoiding, or some good that you might want to be obtaining. There's a hierarchy, there's a value hierarchy, and that value hierarchy is determined by the Sharia. And that's why Ibn al-Qayyim talks a lot about the genre of the afdal al-a'mal, the fada'il al-a'mal, the virtuous significance of different actions. And there's a benefit to learning about these, because it allows a person to know what to prioritize. What's most important? What's more important? Seeking knowledge or being good to your parents? What's more important? Being good to your parents. So what that means is that a person could be busy thinking about how they want to seek knowledge, the different books that they want to get, how they want to study, but they've neglected their relationship with their parents. They have now neglected what was far more important for something that was less important. And so the person who has true ilm understands the priorities within the good. Within the good. So Ibn al-Qayyim explains the importance of the object of thought. That's the first factor. How important is it? The second factor, interestingly, he says, is the likelihood of losing it. The likelihood of losing it. So you can have something that's important, but very low risk that you'll lose out on that opportunity. Being good to parents would be an example of that. I mean, as long as your parents are in good health, obviously, and they're not towards, a terminal illness, for example, then that would be risk of losing. But generally speaking, in good health, they're always going to be there available for you to be good to them. It's not like they're going anywhere. At any point in time, you can call them, say a nice word, you can go over there, massage their legs, whatever it may be. So, important, won't lose. The second thing, obviously, then would be, from these four, important, but high risk of losing. Important, but high risk of losing. Missing out on something. The third thing is not important, or less important, but high risk of losing it. And then there is not important and no risk at all of losing out on it at all. So this helps you determine which things and priorities in your life you should put forward. So some of them are very easy when you put them together. Obviously, important and high risk of losing versus not important and no risk of losing. Which one's more important? The one high risk of losing, obviously, right? Which one are you going to prioritize? Ibn al-Qayyim explains this is all very simple except when it comes to one particular one, where he says most people, even people of intellect, people of deen, they will mess up within this aspect here and not prioritize the appropriate thing. What is this? It is the one that is important but low risk of losing. So important, but you're not going to miss out on it. You're not going to pass by it. And something that is not as important, but there's a high risk that you'll miss out on it. So which one are you going to choose? So Ibn al-Qayyim actually, he explains that this is the one that a lot of people have a lot of taraddud and hayra, they have a lot of confusion in this regard. فَإِنْ قَدَّمَ الْمُهَمْ, if the one that's more important is put forward, then the lesser important one, خَشْيَ فَوَاتَ مَا دُونَهُ, then they're afraid they're going to miss out on that other thing. وَإِنْ قَدَّمَ مَا دُونَهُ, and if they put forward what was less important, فَاتَهُ الْإِشْتِغَالُ بِهِ عَنِ الْمُهَمْ, then they miss out on being busy and preoccupied with what was more important. So, to make this more concrete and less abstract, I'll put forward a few examples. So, let's say there is a social gathering of a dinner that you were, that people were trying to organize, and it's occurring at the same time as an Islamic class. Let's say they'll use Faith Circle as an example. So say maybe there are people who aren't here because they decided, I'm going to go catch up with my friend and go to Smash Burger or go to wherever it may be, Mikasa or Sunshine Kebab or wherever. Because it's actually a good example, because Faith Circle would be ilm, so it'd be important, and it would be low risk of missing out because now we have the YouTube recordings, right? So it's always going to be there. Khalas, you can listen to it any time. The socializing, it's not unimportant, but obviously what's more important? Socializing or seeking ilm? Someone say socializing? It's like, dang, I should have gone to that Smash Burger invite. So obviously ilm is more important than socializing. But the social gathering, is it like permanent? Are you going to miss out or not? You're going to miss out. I mean, if you don't go, khalas, it's over, right? So now which one? A lot of people will think in their head, they'll think, okay, look, the Faith Circle thing, that's fine, there's a recording. I'll listen to it after, and haven't seen this brother in some time, or whatever it may be, or, I just need to relax a bit, and so I'm going to go to the other one, because otherwise, I'm going to miss out on this one. And so I get both then. I get both. So that's an example. The other example would be spending the time at home with your immediate family versus, again, going and socializing with friends. Family is always going to be there, so much opportunity to spend the day with them. And then this friend gathering might not be necessarily something you're going to miss out on, and you might not be able to go back. Or, I won't mention that example actually, because I don't know the answer to that one. I'll just mention it, khair. I'm sure everyone's interested. Studying for your final exams versus, I can't read my writing here.
You're a doctor.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to make up another thing because I can't read that. So studying for your final exams, so that's important and high likelihood of missing out, versus, I think it was basically attending a knowledge event going to one of the Merciful Servants' homeless drives for the evening. So that's an example again of the important, but obviously what's more important from a purpose of life point of view, obviously feeding the hungry is more important, right? But one is fear of missing out, the other one is you're going to miss out, obviously your final exams are coming out, you're going to miss out on study time versus missing out on the food run. In any case, for all these different examples, you can see the dilemma. And you can see how a person would choose either or and how a person would rationalize each choice. Ibn al-Qayyim, he confidently answers it by referring essentially to a particular qa'ida in fiqh. And he essentially says, in every scenario, obviously, generally speaking, there's always going to be exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, the default is a person should choose that which is most important, regardless, and they'll just miss out on the less important thing. Because at every single moment in your life, think about it like this: if you are always prioritizing what's more beneficial, then where are you going to end up? And if every moment in your life, you're always doing what's less beneficial because you're afraid of missing out on something, then where are you going to end up? Look at those two people, you can think on their trajectory. That other person's constantly choosing what's more important. Regardless if there's a high risk of losing or low risk of losing, they're always choosing what's the most beneficial. And they're not fazed by some fleeting thing that they might miss out on, but they want to stay consistent. And whatever is most beneficial, and they're constantly filling their time with what's more beneficial. That person will never regret. Whereas the other person will regret because, as Ibn al-Qayyim says, they are missing out on being preoccupied with what's more beneficial, and so they'll end up being at a lesser status, at a lesser point. You know, subhanAllah, there are so many examples of people, they really want to study ilm, for example, and they want to learn Arabic, and they want to study the deen and take it more seriously. But the problem is, things keep eating up their time. They keep eating up their time. Oh, there's this event. Oh, there's this thing I have to go to. Oh, there's this meeting. Oh, there's this initiative. Oh, there's this gathering. Oh, there's this. The rest of you know, your whole day is gone. Oh, there's this sporting. Oh, I'll just hang out with the boys. Oh, I got a call. Oh, the tough decision. That's where a person really shows their sincerity and also is able to excel within a particular scope. That a person is so focused on whatever it is that they want to do a benefit that they're not going to let other things take them away from this. And you see this with athletes. If you look at professional athletes, there's a lot that you can learn from their mindset and their mentality. If you take that mentality and mindset and apply it to different aspects of your life, you'll see great success and you will see incredible transformation, even spiritual transformation as well. If you see the mentality of these professional athletes who will literally shun everything else and just focus on their craft, just focus on their particular skill set. And you see where they go. How many things did they sacrifice that was less important? That's the most important thing. The most important thing is to do the most important thing. It's intuitive, isn't it? And so if you have a goal, it's about really focusing on that and not having the scarcity mindset of missing out on other opportunities. You have to be confident that you have your particular goals ahead of you, and if you stick to this, then you know where you're going to be. But people who are constantly sacrificing from it and saying, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do this thing and that thing and that thing and the other, then they end up chasing the tail. Excellent. Alrighty. So, we move forward now into the 5 types of thoughts of Allah. Before we do that, Wasim had suggested a halftime because there was a brother that had mentioned that sometimes the content can be a little bit heavy and it's late, it's Thursday after either a work day or a study day or a school day. And so sometimes people just need a little break to relax a bit. So we'll do just a bit of a literally 2-3 minute, inshallah, a bit of a halftime. And then we'll come back, bidlahi ta'ala. Bismillah. Thanks for that halftime report, Wasim. Jazakumullah khairan. Alhamdulillah. A bit of a commercial break. Bismillah. A lot of people say as well that this looks like a sports press conference as well, with this in the back as well. So now we've got a halftime report as well. Khair, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu rasulullah wa ba'd. So we move on to the next section. So Ibn al-Qayyim then, he talks about the positive thoughts and the 5 different types of thoughts that help a person and propel a person on their journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the alternative, as I said, to the concept of mindfulness. Mindfulness might be used to help relax you, but what does that do? You're relaxed, so what? What are you doing for your actual life? Where are you moving towards? That's the most important thing. Islam is focused and interested in the movement of the human being, not just it staying still and being relaxed and enjoying the hayat ad-dunya. This is meant to be a stressful place. It's meant to be a place that induces fears and anxieties. That's why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Baqarah, فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Allah said to Adam, after He sent Adam to earth, whoever follows my guidance, when the guidance comes from me, and whoever follows it, then they will have no khawf and no huzn, no fear and no grief. What does that say? If you don't follow the guidance, that's going to be your natural state. And the point is to move, to let those negative emotions move you, not make you stay still. And so mindfulness, as I said, sure, if you want to just feel relaxed as you let the time pass you by, that's mindfulness. But if you want to move, then that's where tafakkur comes in. That's where tadabbur comes in. That's where tadakkur comes in. That's the active thoughts that the believer the active thought processes that the believer engages in that moves them. It moves their thoughts towards a place that is beneficial. You can think about it like a waterfall. There's this waterfall that's coming through and it's pouring through these thoughts. And you are in charge of directing and guiding that water so that those streams come and it brings forth these beautiful springs and oases. Not that it just drops forward and it's just this swamp underneath that's not moving anywhere. Because when water stagnates, it spoils. Something Muhammad Asad constantly references in his book Road to Mecca. When water stagnates, it spoils. And the same thing with your own soul as well. If it's still, if you're still, then it's going to spoil. It's going to rot. It's not going to move anywhere. We have to keep moving towards our ultimate objective, which is our meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to summarize what the point of this life is, it's to get back home safely. Get back home safely. We're here, this is not our home. We might construct these buildings and call them our home. We might think that these places are our hometown or home city, but this is Darul Ibtila. This is the abode and the home of just tests and trials. Darul Ibtila wal Mushaqqa, hardship and trials and difficulties. This is not what Allah created us for. This is not where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to keep us. This is a transition place. This is a testing ground so that we actually go back home where Allah always intended us to be. That's why He calls it Darul Qarar, the abode of Qarar, which is this settlement, this sense of settling eternally, forever. Darul Khuld. These are the names that Allah uses for Jannah. Jannatul Khuld. That is your actual home. وَإِنَّ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. That the true life is the life of the akhirah. So the point is for us to move back home safely. Because of course on the way is going to be challenges in this world and in the next. The day of judgment, the trials of the day of judgment, the sirat as it passes over hellfire. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. There's not a single one of you except that they will pass by it. What is Allah referring to here in Surah Maryam? He's referring to hellfire. Every single one of us will come face to face with the hellfire. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. And it is only the people of piety, the people who moved in this world towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who will move past the hellfire. If you stagnated in this world, then you'll stay put in the next life. So the movement is something that is so important. And the way in which we move, the beginning is with our thoughts. As we said, everything starts with thoughts. And so tadakkur, tafakkur and tadabbur is what we're going to focus on. Tafakkur is active contemplation. You're bringing together new thoughts, for instance. You are trying to build knowledge, for example. Tafakkur is you're taking what you know and you're putting them together and you're coming to new knowledge. You're coming to new reflections. And that could be about yourself. That could be about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That could be about His deen. You could be reflecting and thinking about the vastness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. And so when you look out and you see the starry night sky, when we walk out from Faith Circle, and you see the vastness of space, and then you do tafakkur, and you think, okay, the vastness of space, and I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described as al-wasi'. He Himself is the vast. And His maghfirah is wasi'ah. Allah says His forgiveness is so vast. And so then you put two and two things together and you realize this is the sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness. And that's tafakkur. That's engaging in this contemplation. You're letting those thoughts be directed towards what's going to teach you more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wattaqullah. You fear Allah. Wa'allamakum Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will teach you. There's the connection between taqwa and knowledge. So that is tafakkur. Tadakkur is bringing back knowledge that you already knew about and bringing it back to your mind so that you may experience an element of faith in that new situation that you're in. You're recalling knowledge that you had before to help you through whatever difficulty you might be going through. To help inspire you in a moment that is very inspiring. To help motivate you in a time where you need some motivation. That's tadakkur. Where you're constantly remembering knowledge that you have. And then tadabbur. Tadabbur is from dubur, which is the end of something or the consequence of something. Tadabbur is taking something to its logical conclusion. Taking some knowledge that you have and thinking it through to its logical conclusion. Thinking it towards its end. That is tadabbur. So these are the different thought patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran. Now, number one of the five that Ibn al-Qayyim mentions is contemplating his speech. So this is referred to mostly as tadabbur. Usually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about contemplating His speech, He refers to as tadabbur. There's two main verses here. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do they not do tadabbur on the Quran, or are their hearts locked? So this is a very powerful verse that points towards not just the significance, but the necessity of engaging in tadabbur of the Quran. Because Allah is giving a choice. Are they engaging in tadabbur, or are their hearts locked up? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Nisa, that's in Surah Al-Muhammad, and this one is in Surah Al-Nisa. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَوَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ لَوَجِدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Do they not ponder upon the Quran? Had the Quran been from other than Allah, they would have found in it much difference. What that means is that you can take any verses from any place and they're all meant to be in harmony with each other. There's no difference, there's no ikhtilaf, there's no contradiction in the Quran. And so verses come together and they harmonize. And so tadabbur of the Quran is something that is an important thing to bring to our minds when we are reciting the Quran. How sad is it that a person recites the Quran, but in their brain is nothing about the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're reciting the Quran, but as many of the companions used to say, don't make your recitation, don't make your hum, don't make your, Ibn Mas'ud used to say this, don't make your hum when you're reciting the Quran, your ambition, the end of the surah. That when you pick up the Quran, your focus is, I want to get to the end of this juz. I want to get to the end of the surah. I want to do one page. And that's your focus the whole time that's getting you through. Get through the page, get through the page, get through the next page, next page, next page. Okay, alhamdulillah, done. As if it's just on your task list. You can just check it out. Check it up. So, contemplating the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very important. That you populate your mind with thoughts of the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what tadabbur is about. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentions that وَلِذَلِكَ أَنزَلَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. That is the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Quran. لَا لِمُجَرِّدْ تِلَاوَتِهَا. Not just for its recitation on itself, but rather the tilawa is a wasila. The recitation is a means to something better. And he quotes some of the early Muslims where they said, أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ الْقُرْآنَ لِيُعْمَلَ بِهِ. The Quran was sent down so that they could act upon it. فَاتَّخِذُوا تِلَاوَتَهُ عَمَلًا. So take your recitation as action. Subhanallah. Take its recitation as action. Meaning, when you are reciting the Quran, there's the recitation with your tongue, but you can, in a sense, recite with your limbs when you act upon the Quran. And the only way you can act upon the Quran is if your mind and your thoughts have been shifted by the Quran, guided by the Quran. Because from thoughts, then eventually come action. A lot of times people talk about implementing the Quran and ensuring that when you read the Quran, you should implement it. You should act upon it. There's a bit of a misconception here because people solely think when they say act upon the Quran like something with your limbs. But when a person opens up the Quran, they realize that a lot of what is being recited in the Quran is not actually exhorting you to change something in your behavior per se. Obviously there's commands, aqimus salah wa atuz zakah, and these sorts of verses. But you will find many verses. وَلِلَّهِ وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Allah belongs the heavens and the earth. Implement this verse. What does that mean? These verses and most of the Quran is there to guide your mind, to change your worldview, to change your perception. Because with that perception, automatically then comes different actions. You can tell someone to do something and they'll do it. But if you change their mindset, their worldview, their attitude, it will come from them naturally and it's actually a part of them. Because the Quran is interested in changing the individual, transformation. And transformation is done by changing the way you think about things. So a lot of the Quran is devoted towards changing the way you look at the world. So وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens, whatever is in the earth. Do you know how you implement that? You implement that when you're afraid. And you use those verses and the internalization that everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that thing you're afraid of losing, act upon this verse. And that action is an action of the heart. Let your heart become confident, become serene, become tranquil with the idea and the fact that Allah owns everything, that Allah controls everything, that person you're afraid of doesn't control your destiny. That family member that you might think is oppressing the family in whatever way, they don't control your destiny. That what's happening around the world, what's happening in Palestine, the Zionists, they don't control the world. They don't decide what happens in Gaza. They don't decide who goes in and comes out of Gaza. You act upon this verse through your heart by changing the way that you look at things. That's how you act upon the Quran. When you read verses about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness, that should inspire you to tawbah. Return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you read the verse, وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ, and Allah is over everything, qadir. He is the one who decreed it, He is the one who willed it. وَلَهُ الْحَمْدِ, and to Him belongs all the praise and gratitude and thanks. So the same being that controls everything is the same being that's described with Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Al-Latif, Al-Khabir, Al-Ghafur, Ar-Rahim, Al-Wadud. SubhanAllah. What an empowering idea and an empowering thought. So the acting upon it is actually changing our attitude and the way we think about things. That you see something happening in your life and you start to realize, this is from the qadr of Allah. What is Allah teaching me through this moment? What is the point of what I'm going through? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree this? Not in a challenging way, but in a curious way. And so these are the important ways in which we contemplate the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, contemplating His signs. The ayat mashhuda. So the first one is the ayat al-munazzal. This one is the ayat mashhuda, which are the natural signs. The signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere. And you can have a subset within here, ayat maqdura, as we just referenced. That pretty much, there's the ayat munazzal or the ayat Qur'aniyya. So all the signs of Allah in His book, that's from His speech. That's from His speech, from the kalam shar'i, from the speech that He has revealed. But then there is contemplating the signs of also the kalima of Allah, but this is the kun of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He speaks the kalimat of Allah, when He says kun fayakun, when He says be and it is in reality. So everything that exists in the world, from nature to the way in which human society is governed, to the buildings, to whatever it may be, every inch of this world is governed by the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not the kalam shar'i. This is the kalam kawni. This is not the speech of Allah that's revealed. This is the speech of Allah that He uses to create the world. And so in both aspects you are contemplating them. One of them is tadabbur, ayat Qur'aniyya. The other one is tafakkur fi khalqillah, or ayat mashhuda. that you are contemplating on everything around you. And you realize that when Allah creates something, why does He create? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates based on wisdom, based on a hikmah, based on a wisdom, based on a purpose, based on a reason. Allah doesn't create things batila, as Allah says in the Quran and negates many times. He didn't create this universe batilan, la'iban, in play or in jest. So there's a purpose, there's a wisdom. What is it for? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates signs of His names and attributes. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith Qudsi, if you were to become people that didn't sin, imagine this creation that didn't sin. Human beings didn't sin. It's peace on earth. Then Allah would destroy that creation and bring forth another creation that did sin. Why? So they can ask forgiveness from Allah. So Allah's created a world and a system where people make mistakes. Why? What's the wisdom? Because it goes back to His names and attributes. Allah loves His names and attributes, and Allah loves to see His names and attributes in the world. So Allah creates the world in a way that maximizes the signs and the effect of His names and attributes. And one of the things that Allah loves the most in His names, because there's a hierarchy even within the names. Ibn al-Qayyim mentions this. Allah loves certain attributes more than others. What's the proof for this? In another hadith Qudsi, Rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. My mercy outstrips or overtakes my wrath. The wrath of Allah, is that an attribute of Allah? Yes, it is. The ghadab of Allah, the sakhta of Allah, it's an attribute of Allah. The rahmah of Allah, is it an attribute? Allah is saying here, His rahmah is more beloved to Him than His wrath. So Allah creates this world in a way that maximizes all of the names and attributes that we can then know, and we see and witness the effects of these. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves mercy. So He created a world where you see mercy even amongst the animals. Even amongst the animals, they don't even have very advanced consciousness or intelligence, but you see mercy amongst them. You see mercy within their families. You even see it with pets, with cats, whatever it be. You see all these videos. I just got onto Instagram, so then I've now seen what a lot of people scroll through and see all these random videos, and then you send them to your friends and whatnot. So I've been hip to all this stuff. And subhanAllah, the amount of cat videos that for some reason just populate my feed, I have no idea. And I'm seeing these cat videos of these cats who are like, they're seeing a baby in distress, and the cat runs to the baby. And it starts to pet it, and it starts to put it down and be gentle with it. Who inspired the cat to do this? Allah created the mercy, even from a cat to a baby. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates a means for us to do tawbah for Him because He's at-tawwab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates a world with tyrants because He is al-muntaqim, dhul tiqam. He loves to avenge those who are oppressed. Allah created a world where there's going to be injustice because Allah loves when justice is served to those who deserve it. So you see that this world is designed and created to maximize the effects of the names and attributes of Allah. And this is the big thing. People ask the question, oh, why is there suffering, the problem of evil, etc., etc. Why does this happen? You know where this question is coming from? The question is coming from an egocentric presupposition. You are assuming this world was meant to serve you for some reason. That you were supposed to be comfortable sitting there, no harm comes to you at all. That you for some reason was entitled to this entire existence. Now fair enough, there are people who are doing it out of compassion. There are people who ask this question, by the way, from two ways. One, it's their own life. But the other one, people ask out of compassion for other people. And that obviously, from an element, is something praiseworthy because it's coming from their mercy. But this is coming from an idea that this world was meant to serve human beings. No, we aren't the creators. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Did they create themselves? Were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves? Who are you to dictate how this world and existence is meant to be? You have been created. You are an object of the Creator. The Creator is the one that decides. And we should be so thankful and grateful for how merciful and incredible our Rabb is. That He is a merciful Rabb. That He's a forgiving Rabb. That we can expect good from our Rabb. We're not entitled to how existence is meant to structure itself. Existence and creation is of course going to be based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. But subhanAllah, what does Allah love? Allah loves benefit for you. Allah loves to love you. Allah loves to show mercy to you. Allah loves to forgive you. Allah loves to be gentle with you. Ibn al-Qayyim mentions this in other places. Allah does not take anything away from the servant except to give him. Allah doesn't break the servant except to put the servant back together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't put a person through any hardship or difficulty except so that He can put him through relief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants khair and good and ihsan for you. That is why He's created a home for you. A home for you, literally with your name on it. A home for you that is waiting for you in paradise. Anything you could possibly imagine. The pleasures unending. That is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for you. And so when we contemplate the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should be contemplating with an eye of, what is this a sign of? What name or attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala am I able to appreciate from this? From the good and the bad, even the evil as well. And what then can that do to my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? With that, we will we'll stop it there inshallah, at number 2 of the 5 types. Inshallah ta'ala, next week we'll complete the different thoughts that bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Any questions?